Analyzing Missing Migrants, Part 1, Loading and Visualizing the Data. The topics of migrants, dying while trying to reach Europe or crossing the US-Mexico border, these things have been in the news quite a lot. And I'm personally quite interested in this phenomenon and why is it happening, where is it happening, over time, how frequently is it happening? To start investigating some of these questions through visualization, we need some data that contains the answers to these questions. If you do a Google search for migrant deaths dataset, you get plenty of results. The best data source I could find seems to be this Missing Migrants project. If you go to the Downloads section, you can download all data in CSV format. It's building the export here, which indicates to me that it's probably quite up to date. The CSV file has downloaded and it weighs 1.7 megabytes. The most interesting columns look to me to be the reported date, total dead and missing, and location coordinates. These are latitude-longitude pairs. Based on just these columns, we can do quite a lot, including answering the questions, when did these events occur, how are they distributed over time, and also where did they occur, how are they distributed over geographical space. The thing that I'm interested in first is seeing the frequency of these events over time. I'd like to see month by month how many of these events happen, or rather, well, what is the total dead and missing for each month, and then plot that. In order to do any of this, we need to first make the dataset available in, I'll do it in a GitHub gist, and then load it in to our program. Since this dataset weighs 1.7 megabytes, and that feels on the large side, I'm going to make a smaller version of it that just contains the columns that we want. So I'm going to delete these columns of web ID and region. Reported year and reported month are already encoded in reported date, so I'm going to delete these. And I'll just delete all the other columns except for the ones we're interested in, namely reported date, total dead and missing, and location coordinates. I'll save this subset as another CSV file. This smaller subset only weighs 337 kilobytes. That's a lot smaller. All right, the next thing I want to do is put both of these files into a GitHub gist. I'll go to GitHub gist, create a new gist, and the first thing I'll do is I'll create a readme.md. This dataset about migrant deaths comes from Missing Migrants project. That'll be the text of the link. And then I'll copy this URL and paste it here as the URL of this link. I'll title it Missing Migrants Dataset. I'd like to get these two files into this gist, and I think since there's two files here, the most straightforward way might just be to use the git command line tool. To do that, first I'll click on Create Public Gist. And then I'd like to clone this Git repository down to my computer via SSH. So I need to click this drop-down menu, copy this string right here, open up a terminal. I'm going to go to my downloads directory because that's where these files are already. And then I'll git clone, and then I'll paste that string. And that has created a new directory that's just this big long ID, which is the ID of the gist. So now I can just drag these files into there by opening up the file manager and then just selecting these and dragging them right into there. And then in the terminal, I'm going to navigate into that directory, cd A9, and then I'll hit tab for autocomplete. And then listing the content of this directory shows these two CSV files and a readme.md. Git status -s will tell us what changed. It says, all right, these two files are new. Then I can say git add dot to just add these two new files. And then git commit -m added data files. And then git push. And now these files should be visible in the gist. If I refresh this page, sure enough, the CSV data is there. And now I can click on this raw button to get the URL that I can use to pull in this data into some program. All right, we've found some interesting looking data on missing migrants, uploaded it into a GitHub gist, found the URL we could use to pull it down into our program. The next thing to do is to actually pull it down into our program and start to analyze it. I'm going to start by forking something that's most similar to what I have in mind. Namely, time is one axis. We're going to show month by month. And the other axis will be the sum total of dead and missing for each month. This working with time scatterplot is pretty close to what I'm imagining. So I'll start by forking this one. And then I'll change it so that our use data hook loads in the migrant deaths dataset. I'll replace that existing CSV URL with this new one that we've got for the migrants data. So I'll paste it right there. And then we need to update the parsing logic. To get a sense of what we need to parse, let's console.log data at index 0, our first row of the data. Right, cannot read property 0 of null. We need to check if data is defined. Only then should we console.log it. All right, here's our first row of the data. We've got location coordinates as a string that contains both latitude and longitude. We've got reported date in this format, October 07, year. And we've got total dead and missing. This one is the easiest to deal with just because it's a simple number. So I think I'll handle that one first. We could say D at total dead and missing, but we can't use D dot because there are spaces here. Instead, we need to use a different syntax, namely these square brackets, and then pass it the string total dead and missing. And we can assign that to be plus D at total dead and missing. Now, when we inspect the data, it's no longer in quotes, meaning it's been parsed from a string into a number. Next, we've got reported date to deal with. I wonder if I take that string and pass it into the built-in JavaScript date constructor, does that parse correctly? That looks pretty good to me. It's in my local time zone, but that doesn't really matter that much, I don't think, for this case, because we're just dealing with days. So I think we can take this field, reported date, and just pass that into the date constructor, D at the string reported date. And this is what we can assign to as well. All right, so we've parsed total dead and missing, reported date, and that's all we need for right now. Now we're in a position to visualize these. Over in index.js, we have our x value and y value accessors, and I'll just paste that logic from parsing just to get access to these fields so I can copy them. So as a first pass of our visualization, let's just say x is going to be D at reported date, and the label still makes sense as time. And y can be D at total dead and missing. So I can paste that right there. And I think that should be the axis label as well. All right, let's see what we've got. All right, we've got some spread of data here. One thing that strikes me is that the axis doesn't look right. It goes from Wednesday to Wednesday. Why would that be? I bet it has to do with this x-axis tick format. So let me change that time format to something else. We can go back to this D3 time formatting example. Since we're spanning over multiple years, I kind of like this format where we see month, day, year. So let me try this one. I'll copy that string. This is the date format specifier. And then I'll paste that over here. And now our tick marks are starting to make more sense. We can see the data goes back to 2014 and goes up to present day. I'll do some minor cleanup here, like tweaking the label offsets. I'll make the circle radius smaller so we can see more detail. And this axis label is getting cut off a little. I think I'll just make it a bit smaller. All right, we've got something here. Here we see each individual event as a single dot on the scatter plot. But that doesn't answer my original question, which is how many people in total are dead and missing for each month over time. To answer that question, we need to do some aggregation. But hey, this is a good first pass. We got the data loaded and visualized in some form, and we can go a lot of different directions from here. That's all for Analyzing Missing Migrants Part 1, Loading and Visualizing the Data.